Dependent personality is a silent drama of submission that grows in the shadow of others' decisions and expectations. It is a life marked by the fear of abandonment, where independence seems more like a threat than a goal. A person with this disorder constantly seeks affirmation, care, and guidance, often at the expense of their own desires and identity, just to avoid being alone. Their world is a web of relationships in which closeness becomes a prerequisite for existence, and the loss of another's presence is an emotional catastrophe. The fear of loneliness knows no logical boundaries here. It is primal, deeply rooted, and constantly active. Every decision, even the smallest one, can feel overwhelming when there is no one to approve it. To others, these individuals may appear submissive, passive, or incapable, but in truth, they carry a desperate longing for safety. It is the story of people who quietly disappear behind stronger backs, not because they lack a voice, but because they fear that using it might distance them from those they depend on for support. A relationship with someone who has a dependent personality is an experience of deep closeness that can, over time, turn into emotional entanglement. At first, everything may seem harmonious. The dependent person is warm, loyal, full of commitment and gratitude. They often idealize their partner, treating them as an authority and a source of security. The need for constant contact, affirmation of love, and approval can feel intense but initially harmless. Over time, however, this closeness begins to feel like a burden. The partner senses that their decisions are now decisions for both, that every silence is perceived as a threat, and every disagreement as a sign of an impending breakup. The dependent person avoids conflict at all costs and suppresses their own feelings and opinions to avoid losing the relationship. They may accept humiliation, emotional or even physical abuse, just to avoid being alone. Their fear of rejection knows no bounds. Even a short absence of the partner can trigger panic, and decisions, even simple ones like choosing a meal or an outfit, become impossible without the partner's approval. In such a dynamic, the partner often takes on the role of caretaker, sometimes out of a sense of responsibility, sometimes out of overwhelming obligation. This relationship can be marked by compassion, but it is also burdensome, teetering between love and emotional dependency, which over time can destroy both sides. The diagnosis of dependent personality is based on a persistent behavioral pattern of submission, compliance, and intense fear of separation, which develops in early adulthood and manifests across various areas of life. A person with this disorder has difficulty making everyday decisions without excessive advice and support from others. They avoid responsibility and shift initiative to others, even in matters they could handle independently. The need for protection leads to an aversion to independence, and the fear of rejection makes them overly compliant, often agreeing to things that go against their own interests or beliefs. A central criterion is the difficulty in expressing disagreement. The dependent person fears that opposing others could result in losing their support. When an important relationship ends, they immediately seek a new caregiver or partner, as loneliness triggers intense anxiety and a sense of helplessness. This is accompanied by a pronounced feeling of incompetence, a lack of confidence in their own abilities, and the belief that they cannot cope with life without other people. The diagnosis is made based on observing this pattern over an extended period and after ruling out other disorders such as depression, generalized anxiety disorder, or borderline personality traits, which can produce similar symptoms. An important aspect of the diagnosis is also the evaluation of cultural and family context. Some societies or parenting styles promote obedience and dependency as desirable traits, which does not necessarily indicate a disorder. Only when this pattern causes distress, limits functioning, and impairs social relationships can one speak of dependent personality in the clinical sense. In one case, a young woman remained for years in a relationship that had long ceased to be mutual. Her partner ignored her and made all decisions without considering her opinion. Nevertheless, she stayed by his side, apologized for things she hadn't done, and convinced herself that she wouldn't survive without him. Even after he broke up with her, she immediately began searching for a new relationship, just to avoid facing loneliness. Another person avoided taking on any responsible professional roles throughout her adult life, despite being highly competent. Every decision, from choosing a course to selecting a career, was discussed with her mother, whose opinion she regarded as superior. Even as an adult, she never moved out of her parents' home, fearing that independence would lead to failure. Every attempt at change triggered panic and withdrawal in her. In another case, a man lived in the shadow of his dominant partner, who decided everything: finances, friendships, even what he should wear. Despite her lack of respect, he stayed with her, convinced that he wouldn't be able to cope with daily life on his own. He believed he didn't deserve anything better, and that separation would be a catastrophe he couldn't survive. In yet another story, a person changed their friends and opinions depending on their surroundings, trying to adapt to stronger personalities. They were always ready to give up on themselves in order to gain others' approval. They had no personal convictions or needs. They lived through others, feeding off their presence and decisions. Without someone by their side, they felt as though they were disappearing. The therapy of dependent personality requires patience, a sense of safety, and the gradual development of autonomy without triggering the fear of abandonment. Individual psychotherapy is most commonly used, particularly the cognitive behavioral approach, which helps the affected person recognize and question dependency patterns, cultivate mindfulness, make decisions, and strengthen self-confidence. A central element is the reframing of beliefs, such as, "I can't cope without others," into more realistic and supportive thoughts. The therapeutic relationship becomes the foundation of this process, a safe space where the dependent person can, perhaps for the first time, experience connection without fear of rejection, while also avoiding a symbiotic attachment. The therapist maintains clear boundaries, models independence, and supports the development of identity without taking control of the patient's life. Pharmacotherapy is not a primary treatment, but may be helpful in alleviating accompanying symptoms such as generalized anxiety or depression. Medications are typically used temporarily and supportively within a broader psychotherapeutic framework. Support from family members plays a vital role. People living with someone who has a dependent personality often feel overwhelmed and torn between compassion and frustration. Education, participation in family therapy, or self-help groups can help them better understand the mechanisms of dependency and establish healthy boundaries. The goal of support is not isolation from others, but the development of mature, mutually shaped relationships in which closeness does not mean the loss of self. It is a long-term process where small steps toward independence form the foundation for genuine change. Is dependent personality just a temporary insecurity? No. It is a persistent behavioral pattern that affects many areas of life. Dependent individuals constantly seek support and struggle to make decisions independently, whereas insecurity is often temporary and situation-specific. Does a person with dependent personality always need someone nearby? Not always, but in the beginning, they heavily rely on the presence of others. The goal of therapy is to develop autonomy so that they can function independently without losing the capacity for healthy relationships. How can you recognize a dependent personality in someone close to you? Signs include avoiding decisions without support, excessive compliance, fear of abandonment, and a constant need for emotional reassurance. The person often suppresses their own needs to maintain the relationship. Can a dependent personality change? Yes. Through therapy, individuals can learn to become more assertive, recognize harmful patterns, and build independence. The process is long-term, but change is possible. Are medications necessary in the treatment of dependent personality? Medications do not cure the disorder itself, but can help alleviate accompanying symptoms like anxiety or depression. They are always used in addition to psychotherapy. How can loved ones support a dependent person? By encouraging independence, setting healthy boundaries, and avoiding taking control. Education and self-help groups can help them better understand dependency mechanisms. Are dependent personalities more common in women? Statistically, yes, but it may go undiagnosed in men because they express dependency differently and are perceived differently due to societal expectations. Can dependent individuals lead fulfilling lives? Yes. With appropriate therapy and support, they can develop independence and build healthy, fulfilling relationships. How does dependent personality differ from borderline personality? Dependency is characterized by constant fear of abandonment and submission, while borderline personality involves sudden mood swings, impulsivity, and unstable relationships. These are distinct mechanisms and symptoms. What challenges arise in the therapy of dependent individuals? Overcoming fears and ingrained patterns, building self-esteem, and learning to make decisions. This requires patience and gradual change to avoid triggering a sense of threat. Dependent personality is a deeply rooted behavioral pattern dominated by the need for protection and an intense fear of loneliness. People with this disorder often submit to others by giving up their own needs and decisions in order to maintain close relationships and avoid rejection. This coping strategy stems from low self-esteem and a lack of confidence in their own abilities. Daily life is often marked by fear and uncertainty, and independence becomes a source of stress. Despite these challenges, having a dependent personality does not mean lacking the ability to change. Through consistent therapy, support from loved ones, and work on developing assertiveness, it is possible to gradually build autonomy and self-confidence. Relationships stop being one-sided, and the person learns to set boundaries and express their own needs. Therapy also helps overcome the fear of abandonment and develop a healthy sense of identity. Although the path to independence is often long and requires patience, it leads to a more fulfilling and satisfying life. A dependent personality is not a life sentence, but a challenge that can be overcome by building inner strength and balance.